Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. And my guest today is Sara Davis, who is the maker behind Golden Earth Designs. I actually saw you first time at one of the local to me festivals in Boston. And it's such a beautiful product that you make that it stopped me in my tracks. And I was like, oh, I want that. And I want that. And I want like every one of them. And before we reveal what it is that you're actually doing, tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, tell me your story of knitting and how you found yourself being an owner of the small business.
It's definitely a winding path, like I think a lot of small business owners. I actually grew up in a family of small business owners. My dad owned his business and was an entrepreneur my whole life, and I helped a lot with the family business. And growing up, I was like, I don't want to do this. That's too much work. I want to go somewhere where I get a paycheck at the end of every week and I don't have to be in charge of everything. And so it is very funny how I ended up here. When I graduated high school, my parents were kind of like, look, you can go to college if there's something specific you want to go for, but maybe don't just go because all your friends are going. Don't just go because it's a thing everybody wants to do. So I really was able to take some time to explore different things that I liked. And I ended up working on a vegetable and cut flower farm for years. And I've been able to pick up little pieces of all these different aspects of local work. And it's funny where it ended up leading me.
Well, when you talk about your father's business, was that anything artistic? What kind of business?
So he owned a lawn and garden store. He was a landscaper. He's kind of a jack of all trades, and he made all of it into a business. And so I grew up, mowing lawns and tapping maple trees and deck construction and all different things. Definitely, he was not very artistic. He's very talented in a lot of ways, but art is not one of them.
So tell me how you discovered knitting for yourself. Like, when did that happen?
That is definitely my mom. My mom and my mom's mom were knitters. So when I was a baby, I had sweaters that my grandmother knit for me. And by the time I was 5 or 6, my mom was teaching me how to knit. And it was a craft that I would pick up for a few years and then not work on it for a while. And then it was maybe 7 or 8 years ago in adulthood that I kind of fell back in love with it and pursued it more and started learning more about fibers and local sheep farms that milled locally. And it's grown a lot since then, but I'm lucky that it was something that I was exposed to at a very early age.
What's knitting for you? Like, do you use it as a form of meditation, relaxation? Is it like intellectual challenge? How do you view it?
I feel like all of the above. I love navigating a new pattern that is maybe more technically difficult than I have, worked on before. And I like that, the first part of a new, more intricate sweater. And I'm like, I don't understand how this is going to work. And it's frustrating, but you keep going and then you see the pieces come together. And I really value that part. And then there are also times where I'm like, I want to be able to kind of settle in for the evening and just knit and kind of have my mind drift and not be super focused on it. So I love that it can kind of be all things at different points.
Well, knitting, like when you think about knitting, people always talk about how the yarn is so squishy and it's so soft. The business that you started is the complete opposite of that. It's like, well, let's tell our viewers what it is that you're doing. Tell me how you got into that.
So I am a handmade potter, and this was not something that I ever really dreamed of doing. I kind of fell into it. So when I was doing organic vegetable and cut flower farming, the winters were a little bit slower. And so one January, my sister showed me a pamphlet for a local art center, and I was like, "Oh, a pottery class. That seems really fun. I'll maybe do that this January." And that was in, I think, 2012. And so I took a pottery class, and I just remember my first session. It was about 3 hours long, and I spent all 3 hours just flopping things on the wheel, just making a big mess and not able to take anything off the wheel. And I remember cleaning up the wheel at the end of the class and catching my eye in a mirror and going, I didn't think about anything other than clay for 3 hours. It was totally all consuming. And for someone who's very anxious and overthinks and spirals out, it was such a breath of fresh air to just be at this potter's wheel in my hands in clay and only thinking about the way this clay is moving. And I thought this is really something special. But I signed up for like a 6 week course and did that. But then at the end of the 6 weeks, the greenhouses were all fired up on the farm, and I didn't have time. The studio was about an hour away. I didn't have time to drive there all the time. And so I dove back into farming and was like, well, that was really fun. And I valued that experience. And I kind of thought that was going to be it. And it wasn't until several years later, I had some friends say, hey, I want to learn that too. So we all signed up for a class and drove down together every week. And at the end of that session, I was like, I don't want to give this up anymore. I want to keep having this be a part of my life. But pottery classes are kind of expensive because all of the equipment is very expensive. So I became an assistant at that studio, and I learned how to load the kilns and recycle clay, and I mopped floors, and I did all of this work in exchange for being able to fire my work in their kilns, which was amazing. And as the years went by, I slowly watched Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace and kind of found a used wheel here and a used kiln there and put together my own studio. Slowly started to sell some pieces here and there. And then in 2021, I got my studio space. And in 2022, I quit my last part-time job, and it's been full-time from there.
I actually love your story because it's like very inspiring. Because when we think about business that's successful business right now, it's sort of like we have this idea that it was like immediate success. You were just born to do the pottery, you came there the first time, you created this masterpiece, and to hear that it was actually a struggle to learn is very empowering for all of us.
Yes, it was definitely a struggle.
Well, when you dream about having your own business, it's one thing like to sit at that wheel and create that perfect mug that like really warms your heart and you want to drink hot chocolate with little marshmallows on top from it. But to turn it into business, like you have to be consistent, it's repeatable projects. Does that ever take joy out of the process?
It definitely can. I think I have what I consider a huge benefit in being able to talk to other potters who have been doing it for much longer than I have. And they'll tell me like, this really took the joy out of it, or this really took my inspiration. This turned it from something I was passionate about to just a job. And so I've been able to have that in my head as I'm continuing to build and grow my business. And there certainly are moments where I'm like, I don't feel like recycling clay today, but for the most part, I'm really pleased with how I've been able to cultivate a business that continues to make me excited about what I'm making. And every time I talk to some potters who say like, I unload a kiln and it's just same old, same old. I promise every time I unload a kiln, I pull out those mugs and I'm like, oh my goodness, it feels like Christmas. It really does. Like they take so long to make, and there's so much work and so many hours in each piece. And then even if I struggle in that process, being able to open that kiln of freshly fired pots and see the way the glaze is formed and see the colors and how everything works together and feel that perfect handle. And it makes me feel so glad that I did push through when it felt like a struggle sometimes.
Well, for those of us who don't know much about pottery, except that it can be messy and exciting and not necessarily look like anything recognizable, guess how I know that? Tell us a little bit about the process of like what goes on, like what goes into making one perfect mug, let's say.
Yeah, it's definitely a process. So what I start out with is just a bag of clay, and I have a potter's wheel. That the one I used to have is not electric, and I used my foot to kick the wheel, but this one is electric, so it has a pedal just kind of similar to one in a car that controls the speed. So You take a ball of clay. For mugs, I use like a pound and a half of clay, and I'll form it on the wheel. And some people, when they visit my studio and see me work, they're like, "Oh, that's really fast. You're really fast at pottery." And that's just the very first step of very, very many steps. So once that piece comes off the wheel, it has to dry for a day or two. I flip it upside down. I let the bottom dry, but you don't want it to dry too much, then it's not workable. You put it back on the wheel and you'll trim. I have one right here. I'll show. I won't show the front of it yet, but you trim the bottom foot so it lifts up nicely. So when you glaze, you don't glaze the bottom of it. You'll glaze just down to this part. And then you have to shape the handle, attach that, and everything with clay, it shrinks as it dries. So you have to be attaching things when they're just the same dryness, and you don't want them too wet and you don't want them too dry. And it's a lot of trial and error. Once all the handle is on, it's trimmed, it goes into the kiln for the first time. And that is the bisque firing. It takes it to about 1800 degrees. And when it comes out, it feels similar to terracotta. It's firm, it's not super fragile, but it's very absorbent. So then you can glaze it. It absorbs the glaze adheres very nicely. You can do a lot of paintings with underglaze, which is what I do. And you can formulate, like this glaze is a formulation that I have in my studio of different minerals. Once that part's done, it will go back into the kiln, and this time it's the glaze firing. So that takes it up to about 2300 degrees. And that's when it vitrifies. So everything becomes food safe and drink safe, and it will hold water. And then it very slowly cools down. That firing takes probably about 24 hours from loading to unloading. And then when it comes out, you sand the bottom, you check any rough spots, and then you have your mug. All of that, because of the drying time in between everything, it usually takes at least a few weeks from start to finish to make a mug.
Wow. I didn't realize that it was taking that long.
You can definitely push it and make it go faster, but you're going to be prone to having things crack and warp. And to me, it's not worth rushing it.
Well, when you think about pottery, traditionally, historically, it was very, homey kind of thing. That's something you have to for dishes and, like everyday routine, basically. Do you see yourself more as a crafter or as an artist?
This feels like an eternal question that I go back and forth about, because aspects of what I do are very artistic, but ultimately I want to make really useful items. I really admire sculptors and people who make big, beautiful statement pieces, but that's not what I do. I want to make something that someone's going to reach for every day. And I want that handle to feel just right. And I want it to serve exactly the purpose that they want it to. So ultimately, I feel more like a crafter who sometimes dabbles in art.
Well, your cups, what makes them super special is turn it for us. Show us that.
Yes. So this is one of them. This is my stockinette heart mug. So it shows, I should have actually picked a different color, but the little tiny knit stitches against the speckled clay here. And then I do ones with little sheep on them. These are some of my very classic ones. And more recently, I've been doing a lot of quilt block designs on them as well.
So let's talk about the process of your designs. How does it come to you? Like, do you sketch first? Do you go through, walk in the woods and like an idea pops in your head and you have to run home and write it down? Like, how do you work it?
I I do a lot of sketching for sure. And with these more textile designs, a lot of times it comes while I'm knitting a project. I'll be looking at something and going like, oh, this could be, I wonder how I could make this work on a mug, or how would I transfer this way? Um, and when I have, this one here is my little flower one. This one came from working in my gardens last year. I feel like there's definitely inspiration everywhere. So it'll just depend on what the piece is that I'll get inspired by. But then once I kind of have a piece in my head or a new idea, I'll do a lot of sketching. I'll do a lot of painting on mugs, a lot of testing, and kind of see where it goes. The first few iterations of these mugs look nothing like they do now. It took took a lot of testing and trial and error to kind of get to this point.
Do you ever come up with an idea that you think is absolutely brilliant and everybody's going to love it and it's a flop and nobody's interested?
Yes. Yes, I'm not sure if I can think of one off the top of my head, but there are definitely times where I'll go to a market and I have a new set of something that I'm just so excited for people to see. And they'll be like, that's nice. And then they'll go to something else. And I'm like, what?
I mean, going to the market in general, it's tough because, first of all, I imagine bringing all your pottery is a lot of work. It's a lot of heavy lifting also. It's not like putting a couple yarn skeins, in your truck.
Right.
It's actually much heavier and like harder to protect.
I'm very jealous of all of my yarn vendor friends who just stuff their yarn into a bag at the end of the market.
Well, as I mentioned, like I met you at the yarn festival. So do you prefer to vend at yarn festivals or do you do other events as well?
It's definitely shifted a little bit over the years. I started not doing very many yarn and fiber events. I did a lot of street fairs, a few farmers markets, general just art fairs in the area. And then one of my friends helped run the Adirondack Wool and Art Festival, which is really close to me. And so she kept bugging me. She's like, you got to come set up with your stuff here. And so I did, I think 2021 was the first year I did that one. And I just loved it so much. First of all, it was incredibly inspiring seeing all of the knitwear people walk by with their new sweaters that they just finished. And I got so many new ideas. But I just had such a blast. I felt like I had the most fun conversations with everyone. I did well in sales, but I really felt like I connected with all the people that stopped by and wanted to chat. And after that event, I was like, I should really look into more yarn events. At that point, I wasn't doing a lot of these current designs of the knitwear and the sheep and all of that. And so those kind of came as I started to go to more and more wool festivals and get more and more ideas.
So when you went to your first wool festival, like what was the first woolly idea for your uh
My
pot-
sheep,
the sheep?
definitely my sheep. I had sheep growing up for a few years, and I've always loved them. I would love to have some at some point when I'm not renting. So the sheep were definitely the first things I'd walk through the animal barns and look at all those little woolly faces. And how could you resist trying to put those on a mug?
So like when you mentioned about your knitting that you like to learn about different sheep breeds, are you having like a desire to do different breeds on your mugs?
I have tried. I haven't leaned too much into it. I've kind of stuck with a pretty standard sheep or more like more cutesy, cartoony sort of sheep. But a long-term goal would be some of my dear friends have Icelandic sheep and some of those like real shaggy ones with the big horns. I'm like, oh, that would be really fun to get on a mug one of these days.
Yeah, that sounds like a cool idea, actually.
Yeah.
Well, when you think of like what you're gonna put that sheep on, how many different items do you make with the same designs?
Um, I I mean, I focus on mugs for sure. I find I just really enjoy making them and people get really excited about their new favorite coffee mug, but not everybody wants a mug and a lot of people already have too many mugs. So I've been starting to branch out a little bit and I'll do like bigger utensil crocks or vases or things that are just a little bit different. I'm still working on sort of what makes sense to like bring to different events and what people will gravitate towards that I still enjoy making.
Are yarn balls part of what you make?
I've made them in the past. I'm actually working on a couple now, but I used to make them every time before I went to a wool festival. I would make a handful of yarn bowls and they would never sell
I'm
ever at yarn festivals. And then I'd bring them somewhere else and they would sell. And my suspicion was that most people at wool events already have their yarn bowls all set up, but I make them a few here and there.
Well, I mean, the difficulty of being self-employed, and it's like it doesn't matter what kind of business, right? You playing so many roles and it's all you. So like when you think about this corporate check and 9 to 5, that's never happening when you work for yourself.
Right.
If you could give away some tasks, what those tasks would be?
Bookkeeping, taxes, that sort of admin work. That is definitely my not my strong suit. That's something that's feasible to give away. I need to kind of set that in my mind to actually hire someone to do that. But that's the part of the business that really feels like a slog, and I'll push it off and I'll push it off. And then when I sit down to do it, it's this mountain of paperwork to deal with. That sort of thing is really tough for me. A lot of the creative stuff, I really love it, even if you get to, the really monotonous things in the studio that take forever. And sure, I could hire someone a couple afternoons a week to help me, and I might in the future, but I actually like kind of putting on some music and just getting into the groove and getting a lot of work done. But when it comes to any sort of admin work, I would love to give that away.
So describe me your average day. How much time do you actually spend making all these things?
I tried to calculate that a couple years ago, and it kind of came to like 50% of my time is actually making it, and the other 50% is ordering new supplies and repairing things on the kiln and doing marketing and signing up for markets and all of that. Yesterday, I got to sit down at the wheel and actually throw some new pieces. And I realized it's the first time in a month that I've gotten to sit down at the wheel and actually make new work, because the rest of the time is making new batches of glazes and running to the supply store and making new, whatever. And so I wish I could spend more time at the wheel, because I do love that part a lot.
Talk to me about marketing because, like business people are not natural necessarily at marketing themselves. And it's always easy to say, like, oh my God, I love that. And it's very difficult to sell your own product and explain to people why paying such an exuberant amount to their mind for something that took you a week to make is not actually exuberant, but super cheap.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually been something that's been really fun and enlightening for me, going to wool and fiber events more and more. Is if I go to a random street fair, there might be a lot of people there who appreciate the handmade items. And there are also a lot of people who have never made things really and don't really understand the time that goes into things. And at wool events, even if they've never touched clay before and they've never made pottery, a lot of people there inherently value handmade things and slow made things and things that take a lot of intention. And you'll watch someone buy beautiful high quality yarn, and they have to get 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 skeins for a sweater, and then they're going to spend 100 hours knitting that sweater. And sure, they could go to Target and get a $20 sweater, but that's not the point. And I think when individuals already have that mindset, they'll look at things that I make, and even if it's not in their budget that day, or they'd rather spend their money somewhere else, they still value it. And that idea made me go, oh, I really, really appreciate going to wool markets. And a lot of these people have a similar mindset as I do. They could buy one of my mugs, or they could buy a set of 6 mugs from, a box store, but that isn't what their goal is. Their goal is to have something that is intentional and handmade. And it's hard to go somewhere where people have no understanding of that. And then I feel like I have to defend my prices, and I don't want to talk anyone into buying pottery. If they don't want to buy it, that's okay. But there have definitely been experiences, not at wool markets, but at other events, where someone will go, "You want that much for a mug?" And I'm like, "I would love to tell you how I made this and the time that went into it." But I get a lot less of that at sheep and wool events, because there is just an inherent understanding of like, handmade things take time and they take a lot of work.
I watched the movie yesterday and they were talking about like destination versus journey. And this girl said, to me, journey is my destination.
Mm.
And it was like it hit home because for me, it's not about the final product necessarily. For me, it's the joy of making. the most important.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same? Like, do you feel like it's all about the process?
I feel very similar to that. I think there's so much, especially when I can tell someone about the steps of the mug that I made or the decisions I made of this one is one of my Fair Isle ones, and I'll talk about the color choices and the pigments that make different colors. And there's a story behind every piece that I make, and so it is hugely important for me to have that investment in each piece of I'm not just cranking out the same thing all the time and getting bored and just slapping the same ideas around. It's there's so much of the journey that I put so much thought into it, and then I find that the final product, the destination of it, it's valuable for the person who now owns that piece because they've heard about it and they understand more that goes into it, and it's not just oh, this is just a replica of that piece that I just made a dozen times over.
Well, you know how sometimes you'll go to, let's say, Metropolitan Museum and you see the antique pottery pieces, and they might be broken pieces, but like something from Egypt, let's say, thousands of years ago. If archaeologists could dig one of your pieces a few hundred years from now, which one would you want them to find?
Ooh, that's a good question. I feel like I would love one of the pieces that I use a lot of different colors in. I would love to see if those translate, hundreds of years later of like what comes through, what would they think of those color choices? Um, yeah, I'll have to think about that one more. I have thought frequently about the idea that I'm making something that theoretically could last for millennia. You do find these shards from ages and ages ago. And that feels a little intimidating sometimes.
I feel like it's also very heartwarming when you create something that can be used by you or by other people, because it's like in the world that we live today of fast fashion, of like everything available from Amazon, to have this feeling that you actually made it, it's very soul warming and empowering.
Yeah, it is. And when I first started selling pieces, I would have people tell me, when I have my coffee in the morning and I have it in your mug, it just makes me feel so happy. And I loved hearing that, but I honestly didn't totally understand it until I started buying more other mugs from other potters. And now it's so true. I'll use a mug that a friend of mine made, and I'll look at the way it's shaped, and I'll look at the choices they made, and it really makes my my morning coffee so much better because there was so much of this person that went into this piece, and I find so much value in that.
Tell us a little bit about what goes into preparation for any festival that you're attending.
So much. So I'm getting ready for Central New York Sheep and Wool in June, and so this week I'm thinking a lot about. So sure, I know I want mugs there. I have a lot of mugs, but what are other things that I can have in my booth that really makes it feel complete and is set up beautifully and will, kind of draw interest. And so right now I'm just thinking about the collection of items that I want to have there and how many of each piece and all of that, what colors will work well together. And it's definitely a lot of pieces to take that you have to fill up an entire booth. That's definitely a lot, but that's the stage I'm at right now, is just what kind of variety of work. So I have over here, I've got little trays of buttons that I'll be bringing, and I have little stitch markers and some of the yarn bowls, some needle holders. And then the big, that's making all of the pieces. And then a big part of it is just getting everything packed and trying to get all of this fragile pottery packed in a way where it's safe to drive for a few hours and still fits in my car with everything. And yeah, it's quite a process, but I've been selling mostly online the past few months just because it's been, colder months. And I'm really excited to actually be at an event where I get to see people in person again. So all of the work will be very worth it.
How many events per year do you do? Is that like every weekend or is it once in a while?
It used to be every weekend pretty much. When the first year I started more full time, I just said yes to everything. I just needed to get my work out there and in front of new eyes. And that was really exhausting to go every weekend. I know people who still do that, and I'm so impressed by that. Now it's definitely a lot fewer. I go to larger events and try to spend fewer weekends working at events and just have more intentional where I'm going to be. So this year it will probably be like 15 or 20 weekends. Like a lot of them are 2-day events. I don't have very many over the spring and summer, but then come September, I've got quite a few autumn events.
When it comes to your business, because it's a small business, like, do you think in terms of business plan? Is there a business plan? Do you have like a vision for the next decade? Or is it like day by day sort of hustle and the next event and the next event?
It's a little bit of both. I think I'm not a very good planner for sure. But where I do try to plan is I I never intended to be a small business owner. It just kind of happened. And now I do value it a lot. And I would like to continue doing it. So the choices that I try to make are what are the most sustainable choices? Right now I am 35 years old and my hands already start to hurt sometimes when I spend too long at the wheel. And so I go, well, if I want to do this for years to come, I need to start now by taking care of myself and stretching the right way and not overworking my hands. So in that way, I think of it in the long term of like, if this is something that I want to keep doing for decades, like I have to start making sustainable choices now. On the other hand, because I didn't plan to do this, I'm kind of the mind of like, we'll see what happens. I really like doing this right now. And if in 2 years I have lost the joy and I've lost the fun and the playfulness, I'm okay with trying something else, going part-time with pottery and working another job, or just making pottery a hobby again. I don't feel totally tied to like this is what it has to be and it has to be like this forever.
Are all the dishes in your house made by you?
Pretty much me or friends, yeah. And they're all mismatched, a plate from this person, a bowl from this person. It's a lot of character.
I love that. Have you ever considered teaching, and like, do you see yourself becoming a full-time teacher in this respect and like sharing your wisdom and your expertise with other students?
I have thought about that. I do get a lot of questions about that because I have a studio space. Right now, it's too small of a space to set up for teaching, but it's something that when I worked at a community studio, I loved helping out teaching classes, especially kids. Like it was really, really fun to just expose them to this material for the first time. I do love that idea, and I think that's something that I could transition more into in coming years. But at this point, with my studio space set up the way it is, I'm not quite able to get there. Though I know a lot of people do online teaching tutorials of how they do their designs and all that. But
I
that
definitely think you should set up a YouTube channel and have some tutorials and teach, maybe do some like virtual classes.
that could be really fun.
Yeah. When you think about like everyday business, is it stressful mostly? Is it like relaxing to be a self-employed person, or like are you constantly, the uncertainty of it is killing you?
Um, I've gotten I feel like it's leveled out for me a little bit. The first year or two was definitely stressful because I really didn't know if it was going to work. And like I said, I just said yes to everything. I was at every market I possibly could be at. I said yes to every single order. And um, that definitely took a lot out of me. I'm grateful that I did it because it got me to where I am now. Now, as my audience has grown a little bit, I have more of a solid customer base. Um, there is a little bit more reliability. Still not really reliable because it's just a handmade business and things can go so many different directions. But I feel a lot more sure of myself and what I make and understanding who my customer is and where to find them. So I think that has gotten a little bit better with having my own business of knowing that I have to keep working hard, but like things are going pretty well, and I just want to keep pushing myself, but also not so much that I don't have time to rest, and kind of that balance of everything.
Well, when you think about yourself back to that 17-year-old yourself thinking about like which way you want to go, do you want to go to college, do you want to work, and think about yourself now, how did having this business changed you as a person?
I think as a 17-year-old, I was very, very shy and very, very timid and was not comfortable in new spaces around new people. And being a business owner, and especially one who goes to markets and has to put yourself in front of new people all the time and has to talk with people all the time, and um, that has opened up a lot of doors of like make letting myself be uncomfortable in some scenarios, and that's okay. It's okay to feel discomfort, and then learning how to grow from that. There was so much. I definitely had like a scarcity mindset of like, I don't want to have my own business because what if I can't pay my rent and I end up homeless? And the idea of no, you can figure things out. You're pretty resourceful, and you know how to work hard. And um, I think, yeah, 17-year-old me would be shocked at the amount of discomfort that I just allowed myself to be in at certain points. Um, and that just has kind of forced me to grow through that.
What do your parents think about your journey?
Uh, they're very supportive. They kind of can't believe that I'm making a living off of pottery. My dad and his businesses are very so hands-on, so utilitarian. And to them, they're like, you can pay your bills selling pottery? Okay, well, cool, good for you. Very, very supportive, wonderful. But I think they're a little in shock.
So, like, you doing all of these things all by yourself, do you still find time to knit? How do you balance that, like, joy and playfulness and the business?
Yeah, I don't always balance it well for sure, but there will be months that go by that I don't pick up any knitting projects and I'm just in the studio every waking second. Um, and I'm definitely getting a little bit better about like, even if you only spend 20 minutes working at whether it's knitting or drawing or, whatever, that can really fuel my creative business. And so there will still be times where I can't pick up knitting for a while, but I think learning that I need to take that time to work on things that aren't pottery because it's really good for my mental health, and that's what will keep me going with everything else. So even if it's just a few minutes here and there, I try to pick it up whenever I can.
Is there anything else that brings you joy, like that you will, like, if you have a day free that you're gonna find yourself doing?
Gardening. I have a lot of gardens. I was a cut flower farmer for many years, and my grandparents were all gardeners, and I have gardens everywhere I can put in my little lawn. I have new gardens popping up all over the place. So if I can spend last week, actually, I set aside a morning and I was like, I'm not going to do anything except for work in my gardens all morning. And that was really, really lovely.
When people talk about women, there is sometimes this sentiment of like cattiness and backstabbing and like competitiveness. You work in the industry that's predominantly women. Um, how did you find it? Do you find the environment being collaborative or catty?
I find a lot of collaboration. I think in the pottery world in particular, there are so many people that are so excited to share their knowledge with new up and coming people. I have found just a lot of people who want to share and want to see me grow. Yeah. And if there is the occasional catty person, like it becomes apparent really quickly. There's, you realize like, oh, this person isn't quite like everyone else, because the vast majority of people are just want to bring everyone into the circle. And I know that's not the case in all areas. And it really seems to be, I've been in and out of the pottery world for 15 years, and that really seems to be standard. A lot of people are just so excited to work with you and share things.
Yeah, I find that as well. Like, I find that it's a very collaborative environment. And if somebody is not like that, they just not your people and you move on and you find your own community.
Exactly.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Sarah, for being on my channel and sharing your journey with us. And I'm gonna put all the links to you so people can find you and maybe meet you at one of the festivals. So go on your website and check you out.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so lovely to talk with you.
Thank you.